How's it going, everybody? This is going to be a little bit of a history and gun video. If you're not interested in those two topics, go elsewhere. I've been talking about politics and economics, and I will get back to that later. I'm just going to do a quick gun video because I feel like it, and some of my subscribers have been asking me some questions about my black powder revolvers. So I'm going to give a little history lesson here on how they developed and what are some of the features with the ones I have. Then I'm going to show how to load, the firing procedures, and then I'm going to show you how you take care of them, because it's kind of an involved process. So if you're not interested in all that, just go away. Alright, quick and dirty history lesson. This is an 1807 Harper's Ferry. You've probably seen this gun before. If you've seen the military police crest for the United States, you'll see two of these crossed. This was the first standard service pistol of the United States. 58 caliber, originally smoothbore. You would not use a patched ball in this. You'd just use a plain lead ball, because there's no use for the patch if you don't have rifling. I won't go through the loading procedure on this one because I don't have time, but you can see another video of me doing that with this. But you'd load the barrel, you'd prime the frizzen. It should be on half cock to start with, but you drop the frizzen down, and if you're ready to fire, go to full cock. Now if you're in cavalry unit, you'd have one shot. You'd take one shot, and then you'd switch to your saber. Your pistol's done unless you're carrying multiple pistols. So you just got one shot, and then it's pretty much useless unless you want to flip it around and brain somebody with it. Next up, you had the revolvers. This one is an 1851 Colt Navy. The first one that came out was a civilian pistol, actually. 6-shot revolver, I believe. I can't remember the caliber, but it was a Colt Patterson revolver. It looked a lot like this, but without this handle here. You actually had to disassemble the gun to reload it. This one you don't have to. There were versions before this, the Walker and the Dragoons. There's 3 in the Dragoon series. They were too heavy for anybody but the cavalry. They were just too damn big. They're very powerful, but just too damn big. A normal soldier could not carry them. This one, the 1851 Colt Navy, was small and light. Originally, they wouldn't be brass frame. They'd actually be steel. I'll talk about that later. But this one had the advantage of having 6 rounds in it. You had to reload it with a cylinder in the gun. You could not replace the cylinder unless you fully disassembled the gun, which is kind of a pain in the ass to do. So more than likely you're not going to do that. So if you're in the cavalry, you could ride in, fire off 6 rounds, retreat, and reload, or take out your saber at this point. But you had 6 rounds. It wasn't just one shot and your gun's useless. So the pistol actually became a much more useful weapon to the cavalry at that point. Of course, we had the Dragoons and Walkers before, but they functioned the same as this. So same principle, you would have 6 rounds, and it became much more useful to them. They became much more powerful. So these weren't really all that accurate at this point. You could get good with them, but the sights were very rudimentary. Once you had the hammer cocked back, the hammer actually has your sight on it. I don't know if I can get a sight picture on this, but they're not very accurate. You have to be up close to really score a hit, but they were a main advantage because you had more shots. The loading procedure for this is you will pour your powder in each of the holes here. You'll have it on half cock so it rotates. Then back in the day, they would then put the ball on. Now we don't put the ball on first. We put a Wonder Wad. It's called a Wonder Wad. It's a little fire-resistant patch. You'd seat that on top of the powder first, then you put the ball. Back in the day, they'd put the ball directly on the powder. Or the conical. They actually had conicals that are shaped more like a bullet nowadays, but for the most part you'd be using round ball like these ones here. I use round ball normally because they're cheaper. They just look like that. You'd seat the ball, you take this loading lever, you seat the ball. It usually takes a little bit of force on the powder. You have to seat it on the powder or it'll blow up. If there's any space in between it, can create pressure and blow up. That's with any black powder gun. You have to have the ball on the powder. So you'd replace that, and then what you'd do back in the day is you'd take some sort of lubricant, grease, whatever you got really, and you'd put it around the ball to seal the chamber. This was good for two reasons. Main reason is safety, because if a spark jumped to the next chamber, your gun would blow up. And no good for you, because you'd probably lose the use of your hand and die. We don't really do that anymore because we have the Wonder Wads, but if you don't have any, you're going to have to grease it up, and I've done, just for shits and giggles, I've done that a couple of times. Once you have all the chambers loaded, then you have to put the primers on. You have to crimp the primer to make sure it stays on. What you do is just put it between your pointer finger and thumb and crush it just a little bit, elongate it so that it's tight on the nipple. So you load all of those individually, and then you would have 6 rounds to go. That procedure would be extremely difficult to do on a horse, so normally they would not do that. Normally they just fire off their 6 rounds and then pull out their saber and go. If you were on the ground and in the military, normally only the officers would carry these, but you'd have 6 rounds as opposed to 1. So you had that advantage. And in between charges, you might be able to reload your gun. Extreme advantage, disadvantages of this gun. Extremely hard to reload, as I've said before, on horseback. You probably wouldn't be able to do that. The only way you can disassemble this gun is by pushing out this pin, which I've already done, and then pulling it out. The only time you'd really do this is to clean the gun. It's not really useful otherwise. Theoretically, you could do that and replace it with a new cylinder. More than likely not going to happen because it's going to be very difficult and involves a punch. So more than likely you're not going to have that on you while you're on a horse or in the middle of battle. So that's probably not going to happen. Advantages, more rounds on this one. A lot of disadvantages though too. Another disadvantage that I find personally is that the safety block on this. In between, you can rest it in between the 2 primers. The problem is it still rotates, so it can fall onto a primer. So even though you've got a safety block in between there, it's still not really safe to carry. So more than likely, if you're carrying this around as a civilian or an officer, you'd actually have 1 chamber that was not loaded, and that way it wouldn't rotate onto a primer. So you'd only have 5 rounds with this. The next gun in line is the 1858 Remington. This one is my favorite pistol. Although I love the 1851 Colt Navy, I've actually owned 2 of these. I traded my first one for the Harper's Ferry. I picked this up for 25 bucks from a guy, fixed it up. It doesn't really shoot well, but I still like it. This is actually the pistol, not this particular one, but the model that Blondie, played by Clint Eastwood, had in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I kind of like it. I actually think this is a pretty gun too, but I've already explained the disadvantages of this. The next one in line is the Remington. This one had a lot of advantages, a ton of advantages. First main one was this. You can take out the cylinder and replace it. That easy. Put that one down, pick up a new cylinder, slip it into place, and you're ready to go with another 6 rounds. That you could do on horseback. So you might carry a number of these with you, fire off 6 rounds, replace it. So your gun now becomes your main weapon instead of your saber as the cavalry. So major, huge advantage. This is a little bit bulkier and heavier than the 1851. Maybe not as pretty. I think it is though. But major, major advantage. The loading procedures are exactly the same with this one, but you'd load one, take it off, and load another cylinder. So you'd have a number of them on you. It's also very, very accurate. This is huge advantage in accuracy compared to the 1851. The sights are not as rudimentary on this one. You can actually see they're in the top, and with this one I can actually perform about as well as my 357 Colt Python that I had, or my Dan Wesson. I had 2 of them, Python, or 2 357s, the Python and the Dan Wesson, up to about 20 yards. So I can perform about as well with that. I mean, this thing is not inaccurate whatsoever. It shoots about as well as a modern revolver, in my opinion, to a point. It can't go out to distance. It doesn't have enough power to do that. But at close range, 20, 25 yards, it does pretty well, actually. So I love shooting this gun. I really do. You have to be very patient with these guns. They're not for somebody who just wants to go out there and fire off a bunch of rounds and not really aim, because it takes you like 3 minutes to load this thing. So firing off 6 rounds as fast as you can, really not, you're not getting the bang for your buck. If you take your time and aim and really enjoy shooting and shooting accurately, they're a very rewarding gun, a lot of fun. They're very dirty. I like the smell of black powder. Some people don't, but they're loud, make a big puff of smoke. They're a lot of fun. They're going to hate you at the range. If you go to an indoor pistol range, they're going to hate you because you're filling the plates with smoke. It smells bad. I'm lucky because the range I go to, everyone knows me, and if anyone complains, they'll tell them to F off because they allow black powder there. But you're really going to want to check with the range in your local area whether or not they'll let you shoot them. But they're a lot of fun. They're pretty cheap. They're very, very cheap to shoot, actually. You can get, I mean, compared to the ammo prices today, I can shoot all day with this and it's not going to hurt my pocketbook. So if you really enjoy shooting, you're not just there to, make noise and just fire off as many rounds as possible, I really suggest looking into one of these or the Colt Navies. You can still find Walkers and Dragoons too, and they're very cool. Like I said, they're very, very heavy, but they're very powerful as well. But they're a little harder to find. They're still being made, but they're harder to find. If you really want to go back in time and get a Colt Patterson, that's going to be difficult to find. I know one place that has one right now for sale, but they haven't been made since the 60s. Because like I said, you have to disassemble the gun to actually reload it, so they're not very powerful with the or they're not very popular with the shooters. But they can still be found. So look into these if you really enjoy shooting. I'm going to tell you a little bit how to take care of them right now. With the Colt Navy, we'll start with this one. You'll disassemble it like I showed you before. You pull that out, pull the barrel out, run boiling hot water, as hot as you can stand it. Some people want to boil the water. I just turn on the faucet as hot as it goes and run hot water through this. Then you're going to want to run a patch through it to dry it out, and then I put oil through it. People say don't put oil through there because it just creates more fouling in there. I don't find that as long as you get most of the oil out there, as long as there's only a very thin coat. Plus, to prevent rust, as opposed to, having to clean it a little bit more, I'll take having to clean it a little bit more. You do the same thing with the cylinder, run hot water. What you're going to want to do first, though, is take your nipple wrench out, remove all the nipples. I'm sure somebody's going to laugh in the comments about that, nipple wrench and nipples. Take all the nipples off. Set them aside, clean them with a rag and oil, and then run boiling hot water through this, run patches through it to get all the excess powder residue out. And let's talk about the nipples for a second while we're on that subject and let the 2-year-olds get their laughs out. These will get damaged over time. You're going to have to buy new ones eventually, because this is the anvil for the primer. When the hammer strikes this, it actually does dent this a little bit, and it starts to get where I'm looking for, bulged out at the top, and the hole starts to close up here just from it smashing down. You can fix them. If you've got a very small file, you can work it around it very gently and get the burrs off of there. And if you've got a very tiny little pin file, you'll be able to widen the hole again. I actually have one I can do that, but it's a pain in the ass. It's easier to just buy one now. So just go buy extra nipples. I use number 11s. There's also number 10s. That depends on the percussion caps you're using. Like these are number 11s. So once you have those cleaned, then you just oil everything and reassemble it. Now, with the Remington, it's a little different. You can't use hot water on the barrel because the frame's attached. So what you do, first of all, put on half cock, remove the cylinder, run hot water through this, go through the same procedures, take out the nipples. With this, you're going to have to do it the hard way. You're going to actually have to scrub out the barrel with a brush, then run patches through it and oil like before until it's cleaned out. You can't run the hot water unless you're really careful and just run it through this way, because if it gets into the internal parts of the frames, it can start to rust and damage your springs, and it's more of a pain in the ass than it's worth. But you know, like I said, you got to be patient with these guns. It's going to take time to clean them. It's going to take a lot of patience, but it's very rewarding and fun in my opinion. One thing I will say is this sliding piece here. It's not as easy as just slipping these out like I am now. If you're actually firing these, if you put 6 rounds, a full cylinder through it, this gets very gunked up and it gets stuck sometimes. So when you're replacing cylinders at the range, I suggest keeping a rag around and wiping this part off before you put the new cylinder in. It's going to make it a whole lot easier to disassemble it later. So that's about all I have to say. I will say make sure that you crimp your caps, otherwise when you fire off one round they're all going to fall off and you're going to get pissed off. I've seen some new shooters do that before, so just pinch them lightly. Don't really crush them, just lightly, just to tighten them up a little bit. Back in the day, they used to actually seal them with wax, because if you're in the cavalry, you'll be riding around in the rain, and you want to waterproof those, so the wax holds them on there and seals them. I don't know if that's a wise tale or not. I've heard that a number of times from a number of different people. I've never been able to confirm that's actually what they used to do back in the Civil War, but it's just an interesting piece of trivia, and it makes sense. So anyways, that's about all I have to say. You can look on my channel of me, find a couple of videos of me shooting these things, but definitely check them out if you got the money. They're real cheap. You can pick one up for 300 bucks. Buying the extra supplies like you know, your powder flask. This is a nice one, by the way, because it's got a measuring on it. This will measure out 30 grains of powder, which is exactly what I need for my Remington. So you just push this pin in, shake it a little bit, pull it out. You've got 30 grains of powder in this bottom part. Then you can fill your cylinder one at a time. Very easy to do. So these cost you a little more money, getting all the supplies, the wonder wads, the round balls and all that. It'll add up over time, but it's actually still way, way cheaper than shooting a normal pistol. So just keep that in mind. A lot of fun. They are not a toy. These are not a toy. They are a deadly weapon. For almost 100 years, people carried these around as self-defense and offense. So, you know, Wyatt Earp and all of them carried these. So it's not a toy. It's not something you would want to give a kid unsupervised. People seem to not take black powder seriously sometimes. They're not a toy. They were real weapons back in the day. They've just been outclassed by modern technology. So people, I've actually heard of people carrying these around as self-defense weapons. I don't know why, but I've heard of people actually doing that, and it would work. These are powerful and accurate weapons, so, you know, I've rambled on for long enough, so that's the video. Thanks for watching.